Hal had won the Galactic Dread Award 7 times. 7 times, the judges had read his work and felt true fear crawl through their minds. 7 times, the galaxy had celebrated his ability to craft nightmares from nothing but words. He was, by every measure that mattered, the greatest horror writer his species had ever produced. So when the publishers at Void Echo Press contacted him about a new project, he expected something challenging, something worthy of his talents. Instead, they offered him what sounded like the easiest assignment of his long career. "We want you to write about humans," the publisher had said, his 4 eyes blinking with excitement. "The newly contacted species from the outer spiral, primitive creatures, barely spacefaring. Our readers are fascinated by them, and we believe their barbaric nature would make excellent horror material." Hal had accepted immediately. Primitive species were simple to write about. Their violence was straightforward. Their fears were basic. He could probably finish the novel in a quarter-cycle, collect his payment, and return to more interesting work. That had been his thinking anyway. Now he sat in his study on Nine, a peaceful moon colony where most of the galaxy's celebrated authors lived, and he stared at a blank screen. Around him, shelves held his 7 Dread Awards. Certificates covered the walls. His previous novels sat in neat rows, each one a testament to his mastery of fear. None of it helped him write a single word about humans. He had assembled a team, of course. No serious project could be undertaken alone. Had joined first, a master of body horror whose descriptions of flesh and transformation had made readers physically ill with terror. Then came, who specialized in psychological fear, the slow creeping dread that built in the mind until sanity cracked. Finally, the ancient one known only as the Sculptor of Screams had agreed to participate. The sculptor wrote cosmic horror, vast and incomprehensible terrors from the spaces between stars. Together, they represented the finest horror talent in the known galaxy. They had frightened billions of readers across hundreds of worlds. They had defined what fear meant for an entire civilization. They had been researching humans for 12 days now, and not one of them had written a usable sentence. The first research session had started well enough. The 4 writers gathered in Hal's archive room, where he had downloaded the complete Galactic Archive's entry on humanity. The files were extensive. Humans had been contacted only recently, but they documented everything about themselves. They had transmitted thousands of years of records, histories, images, and stories into the galactic network. "This should be simple," had said, settling her serpentine body into a research couch. "Primitive species are always good for body horror. Their medicine will be crude. Their diseases will be rampant. I will find plenty of material." She had opened the medical files first. Hal remembered the exact moment her confidence had broken. She had been reading silently, her scales shifting colors as they always did when she was thinking. Then the scales had stopped moving entirely. Then they had gone pale, a shade he had never seen on her before. "They cut each other open," she had whispered. "While awake. In their early history, they performed something called surgery without any numbing agents at all. The patient would be held down by other humans while someone sliced into their flesh with metal tools." "That is quite horrible," had agreed, not looking up from his own research. "Primitive indeed." "No, you do not understand." His voice had grown strange. "They still do it. They have better medicine now, yes, but they still cut each other open, routinely. They remove organs from one human and place them inside another. They slice open their own kind just to see how bodies work. They call it learning." She had kept reading. Her scales grew paler. "There is a thing called a cesarean section. When a human offspring cannot emerge naturally, they cut the mother open and remove the child directly. The mother often survives. They have been doing this for thousands of years." Hal had tried to return to his own research, but discoveries kept interrupting the room's silence. "Parasites," she had said at one point, her voice hollow. "They have creatures living inside them, worms in their intestines, microscopic things in their skin. Some humans in certain regions have parasites in their eyes. In their eyes, how? And they simply live with it. They evolved alongside these things. She had set down her research tablet and stared at nothing. I was going to write about parasitic infection, she had said quietly. It was going to be my most terrifying work yet. But these creatures have real parasites. They have always had them. My fiction cannot compete with their reality. Had not fared better. His specialty was psychological horror, the manipulation of minds, the slow dissolution of sanity. He had approached human psychology with academic interest, expecting to find simple fears he could exaggerate into terror. Instead, he had found concepts his mind could barely process. There is a practice called solitary confinement, he had announced to the room, his bulbous head tilted in confusion. Humans place other humans in small rooms alone for extended periods, sometimes for years. The isolation destroys their minds. They know this. They have studied it extensively. They continue doing it anyway. He had paused, processing. My species resolves conflicts through telepathic consensus. If we disagree, we share thoughts until understanding is reached. This takes moments. The idea of deliberately isolating a conscious mind from all contact is not something we have ever imagined. It did not occur to us that anyone would do such a thing. Then he had found the concept of gaslighting. Hal would never forget watching Reed about gaslighting. The way his eye stalks had slowly drooped. The way his voice had grown quiet as he explained what he was learning. They make each other doubt reality, had said, deliberately, over long periods. One human will systematically convince another that their perceptions are wrong, that their memories are false, that they cannot trust their own mind. Sometimes this continues for years. The victim does not even know it is happening. He had turned to look at Hal with something like pleading in his many eyes. I write psychological horror. I create scenarios where characters slowly lose their grip on sanity. I thought I understood fear of the mind, but this is not fiction to them. Humans do this to each other casually. They have a word for it. They have many words for it. They study it and write about it, and it still keeps happening. Had requested a rest cycle. He had not returned to research for 3 days. The sculptor of screams had said nothing throughout all of this. The Ancient One rarely spoke. It communicated through subtle vibrations and the occasional carved symbol, preferring observation to conversation. It had been reading quietly in its corner, absorbing human philosophy and religion, seeking the cosmic dread that was its specialty. On the 4th day of research, the sculptor had simply stopped. It had set down its tablet, stared at the wall for 6 hours without moving, and then produced a single carved symbol that roughly translated to incomprehensible. Hal had asked what it had found. The sculptor had carved another symbol. This one meant something like, they know and do not care. It had taken Hal time to understand what the sculptor meant. The Ancient One had been reading about human philosophy, about nihilism and existentialism and absurdism. It had discovered that humans were fully aware of the cosmic horror that defined the sculptor's entire body of work. They knew the universe was vast and indifferent. They knew their existence was meaningless in the grand scale of things. They knew they were tiny creatures on a tiny world, in an infinite void, that did not care if they lived or died. And they simply continued existing. The sculptor had built a career on writing stories where characters discovered these truths and went mad. The revelation of cosmic insignificance was the ultimate horror, the final terror that broke all minds that encountered it. But humans started from that understanding. They had philosophers who explained it clearly. They taught it in schools. Children learned that the universe did not care about them, and then those children grew up and built civilizations anyway. The sculptor could not process this. Its entire genre had been rendered meaningless. That night, alone in his study, Hal had finally begun his own deep research. He had avoided it at first, directing his team while reading only summaries. But now he sat in the dark with his screen glowing and read about something called the Columbian Exchange. When he finished, he sat very still for a very long time. Humans had discovered other humans on a separate landmass of their world. In response, they had brought diseases that killed millions. They had enslaved the survivors. They had taken everything of value and claimed the land as their own. And this was not ancient history. This was recent. This was documented. This was something humans themselves had written about extensively, debated, and continued to argue over. Hal turned off his screen and sat in darkness. He was beginning to understand that this assignment would not be simple at all. 12 days had passed since they began, and Hal's team had fallen apart. The research room that had once hummed with confident energy now felt like a medical ward, barely spoke anymore. She would arrive each morning, read for a few hours, and then stare at walls until evening. Had developed a twitch in his eye stalks that had not been there before. The sculptor of screams had not produced a single carved symbol in days. And Hal himself had stopped sleeping properly. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw human history playing out behind them. He saw trenches filled with poison gas. He saw mushroom clouds rising over cities. He saw things he could not see. "I tried to write about warfare yesterday," he told his team one morning. They sat around the research table, none of them looking at each other. "I thought perhaps that would be the angle, primitive species and their violent conflicts. Simple horror, yes." No one responded. They knew where this was going. "I found something called the First World War," Hal continued. His voice sounded strange even to himself. "Humans dug holes in the ground and sat in them while other humans tried to kill them. They sat in mud and filth and watched their friends die for years. Not days, not weeks, years. The war lasted 4 years, and for much of it, neither side moved more than a few measures. They just kept dying in the same holes." Made a soft sound. His eye stalks drooped further. "I thought that was the worst of it," Hal said. "I was wrong. 20 years after that war ended, they had another one, a bigger one. They developed new ways to kill each other. They dropped fire from the sky until entire cities burned. They built factories specifically designed to murder millions of their own kind. Not soldiers, just people. Men, women, children. They documented everything. They kept records. They were very organized about it." He pulled up an image on the room's central display. The team looked at it and looked away quickly. "This is called a nuclear weapon," Hal said. "Humans created it. They used it twice on populated cities. Not military targets. Cities full of people just living their lives. The weapon vaporized everything at the center and left the survivors to die slowly from invisible poison. Humans knew what it would do before they used it. They calculated the deaths in advance." Spoke for the first time in days. "My species fought 3 wars in our entire history. Each was resolved in days through ritualized combat. We could not imagine prolonged conflict. The concept did not exist for us." "Humans sustained a single war for 100 years, Hal replied. 100 years of killing. Different humans, same war. They passed it down through generations." The sculptor of screams produced a symbol. It meant how. "I do not know how," Hal admitted. "I do not understand any of it. I have tried to frame these events as fiction. I have tried to write them as horror. No editor in the galaxy would accept it. They would say it was too dark, too gratuitous, too unrealistic. No species could actually behave this way." He closed the display, and the room fell into silence. Spoke next. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I researched human reproduction," she said. "I thought perhaps I could write body horror about their breeding. They carry their young inside their bodies for 9 months. The process is dangerous. Before modern medicine, many of them died giving birth." She paused, scales flickering with distress. "Then I looked at infant mortality rates throughout their history. Half of all human children died before reaching adulthood. Half. For most of their existence as a species, parents watched half their children die. They had more children knowing most would not survive. They gave them names and loved them and buried them and kept going. Her voice cracked. I cannot write that. I cannot turn that into entertainment. It is not horror. It is just endless suffering. Added his own discovery. I found something called a foster care system. Human children whose parents die or abandon them are collected and placed with other humans. Sometimes this works well, often it does not. Children are moved from home to home, never belonging anywhere. Some are abused, some are forgotten. They have millions of these children, millions. The sculptor vibrated with agitation. It carved a symbol rapidly, then another, then a third. Together they meant something like, they know this is happening and cannot stop it. That is the worst part, Hal agreed. They know, they document everything. They study their own atrocities. They write books analyzing why they do terrible things. They create entire fields of study dedicated to understanding human cruelty, and then they keep doing it. The room fell silent again. Finally rose from her couch. She moved slowly, like someone very tired or very ill. I am resigning from this project, she said. I cannot do this anymore. I thought I understood horror. I thought I could write about anything. But I cannot write about humans. They have already written every horror I could imagine, and they lived through it first. She left without looking back. Watched her go and then turned to Hal. I made a discovery last night. I was searching for something, anything that I could fictionalize, something that humans had not already experienced. I found their entertainment instead. Their entertainment. Humans invented horror as a genre, said. His voice held a strange wonder mixed with despair. They created stories specifically designed to frighten themselves. They seek out fear for pleasure. They watch recordings of terrible events because they enjoy being scared. They invented creatures called serial killers and then made them into celebrities. They take tour of locations where mass death occurred. They visit these places for fun. Hal felt something shift in his understanding. They do something called, continued. They write frightening stories and share them freely. Children read them. Children write them. Human children deliberately scare each other as a form of play. They have done this for their entire history. Sitting around fires in darkness, telling stories about monsters. It is central to their culture. The sculptor carved a symbol. It meant, why frighten themselves? Because they are not afraid of fear, answered. They domesticated it. They turned terror into entertainment. They took the worst things their minds could imagine and made games out of them. He looked at Hal with something like defeat in his many eyes. How do you frighten a species that invented being frightened for recreation? How do you write horror for creatures that have already written every horror possible? They have nightmares we cannot imagine, and they sell them in stores for children to read. Hal had no answer. Continued. I found a human concept called catharsis. They believe that experiencing negative emotions through fiction helps them process real negative emotions. They deliberately seek out sadness, fear, and grief in their stories because it makes them feel better about their actual lives. Their actual lives, Hal. Their lives are so filled with horror that they need fictional horror just to cope with it. The sculptor of screams rose suddenly. It had been still for so long that the movement startled everyone. It carved one final symbol, quick and rough. The symbol meant, I am done. Then the Ancient One left, and Hal was alone within the research room. What do we do? Asked. The publisher expects a novel. We have nothing. We cannot write about these creatures. Everything we imagine they have already done. Everything we fear they have already survived. Hal looked at the blank screen where his novel should have been growing. 7 dread awards lined his shelves. His entire career had been built on his ability to create fear. But humans had created something he could not match. They had created reality. We need to tell the publishers, he finally said. We need to explain that this project cannot be completed. Nodded slowly. They will not understand. No, Hal agreed. They will not. But perhaps we can make them understand. Perhaps, if we show them what we have found, they will see why 5 of the greatest horror writers in the galaxy cannot write a simple novel about primitive humans. He began gathering his research files. The true horror, he was beginning to realize, was not what humans did to each other. It was what they endured and kept going anyway. It was their resilience, their refusal to stop existing despite everything their existence contained. And somehow, impossibly, it was also their hope. He had seen that too, buried in the research. Humans hoped. After everything, after all of it, they still hoped. They built things and loved each other and created beauty in the middle of all that darkness. Hal did not know what to do with that information, but he suspected it was the key to something important, something that went beyond horror into territory he had never explored. He would need to think about it carefully. But first, he had to face the publishers. The chamber of the Galactic Publishers Council was vast and ancient, carved from living crystal that hummed with centuries of accumulated knowledge. Light filtered through faceted walls, casting rainbow patterns across the gathered council members. 17 representatives from the galaxy's most powerful publishing houses sat in a semicircle, their various forms radiating impatience. Hal stood before them alone. His team had refused to come, had not responded to messages in days, had taken a transport to the far side of the moon and would not say when he planned to return. The sculptor of screams had sealed itself in its workshop and produced nothing but silence. So Hal faced the council by himself, carrying the weight of everything they had learned. "You were commissioned to write a horror novel about humans," said the head publisher, a massive creature whose crystalline body reflected the chamber's light. "The contract delivery within 1/4 cycle. That time has passed. Where is your manuscript?" "There is no manuscript," Hal said. The council stirred with displeasure. Several members made sounds of disapproval. "You are Hal," another publisher said, 7-time winner of the Galactic Dread Award. "You assembled the finest horror writing team in known space, and you are telling us that you produced nothing." "I am telling you that we cannot produce what you asked for." "Cannot or will not?" Hal considered the question. "Both, I suppose, but mostly cannot." The head publisher leaned forward, light refracting through its body in patterns of irritation. "Explain." Hal had prepared for this moment. He had organized his thoughts, assembled his evidence, practiced his delivery. But now, standing before the council, he found that preparation meant little. There was no good way to explain what he had learned. He simply began. "Humans eat the flesh of other beings," he said. "This is not unusual in itself. Many species consume organic matter, but humans do it in ways that disturbed even our body horror specialist. They eat creatures while those creatures are still alive. They have a delicacy called sashimi that involves consuming raw flesh cut from living animals. They raise other beings specifically to kill and eat them. They have industrialized the process of death." The council listened without expression. This was not horror to them. This was merely strange. "But that is not why we could not write the novel," Hal continued. "This is why." He activated the chamber's display system. Images appeared in the air above him, images he had pulled from human archives. "Humans kept members of their own species as property," he said, "for they bought and sold each other. They bred each other like livestock. Parents were separated from children and never saw them again. This was legal. This was normal. This was how their societies functioned for most of their history." He changed the image. "They invented economic systems that allow individuals to hoard resources while others starve meters away. Not theoretical others, actual others. Real humans dying of hunger while other humans possess more food than they could consume in 100 lifetimes. They know this is happening. They discuss it constantly. It continues anyway." Another image. "They created religions that promise eternal torture for finite crimes. Humans who violate certain rules their religions say will suffer forever after death, not for 1,000 years, not for 1,000,000, forever. Infinite punishment for beings who live less than a century, and billions of humans believed this, taught it to their children, found comfort in it. The council was becoming uncomfortable. Several members shifted in their seats, but Hal was not finished. They documented all of this, he said. They wrote it down. They analyzed it. They criticized it. They created entire academic fields to study why they do terrible things. They understand their own cruelty better than any outside observer ever could. He paused, letting that sink in. And they continued doing it anyway. The head publisher spoke carefully. These are disturbing facts, but they seem like excellent material for horror. Why could you not use them? Because humans already used them. Hal changed the display again. Now it showed human books, films, art, horror stories written by humans about humans. Every nightmare we have imagined across 10,000 years of fiction, humans have actually done. And then they wrote about it themselves. They gave it narrative structure. They turned their own atrocities into entertainment. He gestured at the display. They have a word for pleasure derived from others' suffering. They call it schadenfreude. They have multiple words for it in every language. They not only experienced this emotion, they named it. They studied it. They made jokes about it. Another gesture, another cascade of images. They invented the horror genre. They created stories specifically designed to frighten themselves. They seek out fear for recreation. They take tour of locations where mass death occurred because they find it interesting. They make celebrities out of serial killers. They tell scary stories to children for fun. Hal lowered his hands and faced the council directly. How do I write horror about a species that invented horror? How do I frighten creatures who domesticated fear itself? Every terror I could imagine, they have already imagined. Every nightmare I could create, they have already experienced. They did not need me to show them darkness. They have lived in it since their beginning. The chamber fell silent. The publishers exchanged glances, but none spoke. There is more, Hal said quietly, and this is the part that truly broke my team. He took a breath. Humans also create profound beauty. In the middle of all that horror, surrounded by all that suffering, they compose symphonies. They paint masterpieces. They write poetry that can make readers weep with its truth. They build hospitals to heal the wounds they inflict on each other. They run into burning buildings to save strangers. They donate organs to people they have never met. His voice grew strange. They invented the concept of human rights specifically because they knew what they were capable of without them. They looked at their own history, saw all the terrible things they had done, and decided to create rules to stop themselves from doing those things again. They fail constantly. They violate their own rules all the time, but they keep trying. They keep writing new rules. They keep hoping they can become better than they are. The sculptor of screams had helped him understand this part. Before sealing itself away, the Ancient One had carved a final series of symbols. They had taken Hal hours to translate. Humans are simultaneously the monsters and the heroes of their own stories, he said now, repeating the sculptor's wisdom. They are the horror and the hope in the same breath. They contain everything terrible and everything beautiful, and they carry both inside them every moment of their lives. He looked at the council with something like awe in his expression. I cannot write horror about that. No one can. It is beyond horror. It is beyond any genre we have created. Humans are not subjects for our fiction. They are authors themselves, and they have been writing their story for longer than our civilization has existed. The head publisher stirred. Then what do you suggest? We have a gap in our catalog. Our readers expect content about the newly contacted species. Hal almost laughed. After everything he had learned, the publisher was still thinking about catalogs and reader expectations. I suggest you translate existing human history texts and market them as fiction, he said. No one would believe they were real. The council murmured among themselves. Some seemed offended, others looked thoughtful. "And what will you do?" another publisher asked. "You were the greatest horror writer of your generation. If you cannot write horror anymore, what will you write?" Hal had been thinking about this question since the night he first read about the Columbian Exchange. He had turned it over in his mind during sleepless cycles, examining it from every angle. "Humans have a type of fiction called literary fiction," he said slowly. "Stories where the horror is quiet, domestic, stories that do not resolve neatly, stories that reflect life as it actually is, messy and painful and somehow still worth living." He straightened, feeling something shift inside him. "I think I would like to try writing that. I think I would like to write about creatures who know the universe is cruel and choose kindness anyway, who understand that everything ends and still build things meant to last, who have seen the worst of themselves and still reach for the best." The council stared at him. This was not the Hal they knew, the master of nightmares, the architect of fear. This was someone new. "I am retiring from horror," Hal announced. "Not because humans broke me, though they did, but because they showed me something more interesting than fear. They showed me hope that exists without reason, love that persists despite logic, beauty created in defiance of everything that argues against it." He turned to leave, then paused. "If you want horror, read human history. It will provide more than you can possibly use. But if you want something else, something I do not yet have a name for, something that sits between terror and wonder and makes you feel small and enormous at the same time, then perhaps wait for my next book." "What will it be about?" the head publisher called after him. Hal considered the question. He thought about who had discovered that humans gave names to children they expected to die and loved them anyway. He thought about who had learned that humans deliberately frightened themselves to cope with lives already full of fear. He thought about the sculptor who had found that humans knew the universe was meaningless and built civilizations in spite of that knowledge. "It will be about creatures who live in the dark," he finally said. "Not because they do not know the sun exists, but because they have seen it and understood that darkness is where they must do their work. It will be about building fires in the void. It will be about the strange courage of beings who know exactly how small they are and refuse to act like it." He did not know if he could write such a book. He did not know if his skills would translate, but he knew he had to try. "Humans call it the human condition," he said quietly. "I do not think I can fully capture it, but I would like to spend the rest of my career trying to understand it." And with that, the greatest horror writer in galactic history walked out of the council chamber and into whatever came next. Behind him, the publishers sat in silence, looking at the images still floating in the air. Human wars, human love, human cruelty and human kindness, tangled together so thoroughly that no one could separate them. One of the younger publishers made a quiet comment to her neighbor. "Should we really translate their history and sell it as fiction?" Her neighbor, an ancient being who had been publishing books before most species achieved, made a sound that might have been a laugh. "No one would believe it," the ancient publisher agreed. "But perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the best horror is the kind you can convince yourself is not real." And somewhere on a small blue world in the outer spiral, humans continued doing what they had always done. They hurt each other and healed each other. They built things and destroyed them. They created horror and they created hope, and they never seemed to understand how remarkable either one was. They just kept going. It was, Hal thought as he walked home under alien stars, the most frightening and the most inspiring thing he had ever encountered. And he still had no idea how to write about it. But he would try.